idea started between Bantu Maora and Taweza Communications, and the whole purpose of setting up the journal was to provide room. It was Caroline who said that we like having conversations. Yes, it was for purposes of having a conversation happening between practitioners, researchers, community, and a diverse group of people who would not normally be in the same space to discuss issues surrounding culture. That was the whole purpose of Jahazi. And another one, when we talk about community, I think the whole idea of, and this has been talked a lot about in our Kenyan space, the conversation between young artists or young cultural practitioners and those older, well-established practitioners, where we're saying that there hasn't been enough conversation going on in terms of the younger artists coming up, not knowing where all this came from, on whose shoulders do they stand, what was the work that was done previously. So this journal was supposed to be part of that, or to serve that purpose, as a way of documenting work that is ongoing for the future as well. So for me it was an honor to be asked to join the editorial team at that point, and I'm still here, and will be for some time, while you can. So that was just the step back that I wanted us to take to know how far Jahazi has come. This special issue went a step further because with this special issue we did something that we haven't done before. While we did a lot of work and compiled a lot of work from the Kenyan space, even with contributors from the diaspora who were mostly Kenyan, we were also, and had actually started intentionally by saying that we were not only going to talk about Kenyan cultural spaces and work, we were actually going to talk about the Eastern African space, because this is a space that is not talked about when it comes to matters art. So we were hoping that this journal will begin to make accessible that space for people to know what's happening in East Africa. So this special edition takes it even further, because we're thinking one of the things that is being revived and getting new, a new vibrancy is Pan-Africanism. And for this journal, what we've been able to do is that we have received articles from different parts of the continent. We have articles from the north, we have Algeria, we have Egypt, we have Ethiopia, we have articles from western parts of Africa. We have Nigeria, we have Benin, we have, I forget, Senegal and Senegal. We have articles from the south, we have Zambia, we have somebody from South Africa.
Mozambique.
Yes, and we have, again, we have from East Africa, we have Kenyan contributors, we have Ugandan contributors as well. The other thing that we're doing for the first time, when we started, because we were talking about the Eastern African region, most of our articles were in English, but we also had articles in Kiswahili, though we did not translate them and carry them as Kiswahili, articles in Kiswahili. For this edition, we have articles written in French, translated into English for the first time, and we hope that this will be a practice that will carry on into the future. And also what we've been able to do, we have been able to diversify our contributors. Originally we've been looking at cultural practitioners, we've been looking at scholars, but more for this particular edition, we've been able to bring in communities, where we have community-based organizations, where we have the media contributing into this space. So it is not purely a scholarly, and this we have been saying since we started. And the reason why we're talking about practitioners, cultural practitioners, is that we did not want scholars or the academic space to be the only space available in the journal. We wanted this journal to be read by the practitioners as well, and not just read, but with their contributions as well. There are those who are practicing, there are those who will only look at the theory of the work, but bringing them together then expanded the space that we would be making accessible. So in this, we have diversified, we have added the community, we have brought in the media, and we hope that our community, in terms of the space that we provide as Jahazi, will continue growing. And so, I'll talk very briefly because a lot has been said from the panel and by Prof in relation to what is in the journal. And as the panel started by saying, this is a very emotive, subject. And yes, it was very emotive for us as well. Things that we agreed with, things we totally disagreed with, that we're saying, okay, you write your own article, this is not yours, you can disagree in another article. But then let's look at this article the way the contributor really wanted to, or what issue the contributor wanted to bring in. But what it also did, it made us take a step back in terms of what words are we using? What are we saying? If you're disagreeing with the narrative, what are the words that we've been perpetuating to deal with this, to deal with this issue? And one of the things then that was affected was the title of the edition of this issue. When we started out, we said, which is what is the normal phrase that is used. We talk about the return of African cultural heritage. But it took a step back and said, no. And we changed the title to reclaiming. Reclaiming, because if for us, this is a word that we wanted because we were actively going out and saying, it is our right. The sweater, it is our right. And so it made, for us, well, the use of the word makes it our responsibility in terms of claiming back and not sitting back and waiting to get these as loans or gifts, but we are actively seeking our rights. So the title of the journal is Reclaiming our cultural, It is my sweater. Just because you're wearing it now does not mean it's yours. It is mine. Now the journal then is divided into three sections. Depending, like you're saying, we talked about objects, we talked about, you're talking about body parts or remains, and we're talking about the issue around the infrastructure that is needed, the policy or legal frameworks that are needed in terms of getting back and keeping all that is out there that needs to come back. So, section 1 is what we said is bring back our people. Like I said, we are not asking nicely. Bring back our people. What are out there that might be called remains, that might be called skulls, are people. And these people have families. These people come from somewhere. And when we don't return these people to where they should be, we have broken a circle. And when we break that circle, it's not just the family that hurts. It's not only the family that does not get closure. This impacts on the community to which that family belongs. This impacts on the country to which this person belongs. And so we are able to talk about a disconnected community. We talk about a deceased community as a result of these bodies, these people being held and kept away from their homes. So bring back our people. Here we have articles, one from Mozambique that talks about the issue of images, where it's not just bodies, the physical bodies, but they're talking about people who are carried to Portugal. Exotic, like you carry pets or animals. So the communities in Portugal could see these exotic beings. And photographs, and the exhibitions were held around them. And he talks about what does restitution for that kind of act mean? So your question, in ways in which restitution can be made. You carried people, you took photographs, you held exhibitions around them. Is it enough that you bring back the photos of what was done? Or the exhibitions that were held? Is it enough? So when we talk about restitution, when we talk about reparation, those are some of them. What will be enough to help the dis-ease, the disconnectedness, to heal these communities? We talk about we've talked about the Vigango. We talked about Karambu Olsente, where a descendant actually asked a question that kind of just made us stop for a moment and think, okay, what are they doing with these bodies? Mangameli is an 89-year-old man who has been looking for his grandfather, is still waiting, has already had 2 DNA tests done. Did we need the DNA test when you have a family tree that points out who his grandfather was? And the people are still there? So what does it mean for these families once that body is returned? Is it enough that they will bury this cow that is being held? Is it enough? Zambia, they talk about the broken hill man, a skull again that was has not been brought back. About 300,000 years old. But he also brings up an important question, which is, has the government asked for this to be brought back? Have they asked for their old man, for their ancestor to be brought back? Have they carried out their responsibility as a national government to be able to say, this 300-year-old ancestor belongs to us. He's part of our history, he's part of our community. This is where we came from. The story is written by somebody who talks to a teacher who was asking, we need evidence to be able to tell our children, students, that these people actually existed. It's not just a name. That 300 years ago, there was a human being here in this space. We didn't just come, we didn't just happen in this continent, we have been here. So how do we teach history when the evidence that we need to teach that history is held elsewhere? What do we show the children? Yeah. And we have, again, the question of another great man from Tanzania whose skull is also being held. And this actually is even, in addition to not just being held, it's, for lack of a better word, I'll call it, as Dr. Ngumi said, the conspiracy around bodies, skulls, disappearance, and suddenly nobody knows where they are. Were they misplaced? Is it a shoe that kind of got lost under the bed somewhere that nobody knows where it is? So, how do you misplace human beings? And so that question, the question of what happened to these bodies that we cannot account for, the Kimathis, the I keep getting that name wrong, so I need to read it. Makungana. How do we find closure? How do we find closure when there's nothing for us to buy? And yet we know that these, as I said, these are being kept away intentionally. So, bring back our people. The next section is bring back our belongings. We keep talking about objects, and I think it was important what was said during the panel about we want our objects back. And we keep referring to them as objects, yet in the same breath, we are able to say, they're not just objects. They're not just objects. They are imbued. They are imbued with the meaning of the people who held it, who made it, who used it. And so by denying them that, you deny them a part of themselves. So these belongings, again, because they're not just objects lying somewhere, they belong to somebody. It's not just stuff. It's not just things. They belong to somebody for a reason, and they need to be brought back. And this is the section where we have most of the articles under. From North Africa, where we talked about Egypt, we talk about the birth of the Egyptian Queen Nefertiti. We talk about the Rosetta Stone from Egypt. In Ethiopia, they talked about, actually, I think there are two articles on the same issue, about the plunder that happened in the Palace Magdala, where somebody actually said that we cannot even list all the things that were taken there, because it is estimated that the things that were taken there were carried away by 11 elephants. I mean, not 11, 15 elephants. So there's also the question of what was taken. Do we have a list of everything that was taken? Do we know everything that was taken? Or are we relying on the lists that they give us that says, okay, this is what we have. This one we don't know that one, so here's our list. How much work, and this goes back to Njeri, what you said, in terms of the work that we need to do through the institutions that we have as a country. What's our government doing in creating that list? Do they know everything that was taken? Or are we just, when we say that we need to engage everybody, to what extent are we engaging the communities to find out what was taken from you? What do you want to claim back? What's on your list? So that is North Africa. West Africa, we talked about the knock art. We talked about there's an article about the Benin bronzes. Sorry, just to go back, something that came up with the Ethiopian, in relation to the Ethiopian stolen heritage, was the fact that unlike maybe many other African countries, that they have started receiving some of the the things that had been stolen. But then there was a question of how much, when we say at least things are coming back, at least, if we get 1 or 2 items from a list that has 100, is that okay? So there's a trickling back. There's a trickling back. And so there is a responsibility here that needs to be taken in terms of claiming for the full list. Jenny talked about, okay, maybe there's some things we don't want back. But they came from here, so why don't we just take them and then do what we want with them? We want to throw them. There are others, they are ours to throw away as well. So there's a lot in terms of what has been taken in relation to what is actually coming back. We talked about from West Africa, and in West Africa it was really interesting to hear most of the writers refer to a report that was commissioned by the president when he was coming into power, Macron, and they had he promised to return the stolen heritage. Very little has happened, and France has been quite silent on this matter. And most of the West African countries are saying those are all empty promises that were made. We have not seen much that has come back since that time. There's very little that relates to the report that has been fulfilled. So yes, we will ask and declare that it is our right to have them back. What happens if they don't keep their promise? What do we do? What recourse do we have? In my community, you have to be very careful where you steal from. Very, very careful. Because the owner might find you there in the morning because you can't move. And they will call upon all manner of things to get their things back. They will be stuck in your hand, on your head, or whatever it is. That is with many communities. So I'm asking, what is our recourse? Do we call back our things? Is that the last recourse we have? Do we call back our ancestors? Join hands as Africa, and use all the powers that we have to call back our things, to ask them to rise and come back home. So we need to think, what is our recourse when this is not, when the stolen property is not brought back? I cannot call each by name. We have 13 very interesting articles on our belongings that were taken and our take on how and these things should be brought back. There's always a question that is being brought to bear, of course, you don't have a place to keep them, what's your storage, we cannot transport them, they'll get damaged as we transport them, or we can give them to you as on loan for a few months, and so on and so forth. When somebody steals from you, natural justice demands that you should not negotiate how this thing comes back to you. You shouldn't have to explain, I will keep it here, I will keep it for, or even say, okay, yes, I'll take it back temporarily and then I will give it back to you. Because as some of the writers say, then what you have basically done is that you have denied yourself the right of ownership of that item. So how will you ask for it again after you have given it back? Because you're saying that that is the rightful owner. So bring back our belongings. The third section talks about voicing and capacity building. I know Jerry and Njoki had a different take on the whole issue of capacity building, but at the end of the day, we do need, so first, we have to agree that these are our things. Where we keep them, when we get them back is, no, when we get them back is none of anybody's business. Secondly, these things that you took for safekeeping were somewhere already. They were being kept, they were being used. Kaiser Wilson talked, just to go back onto the belongings that were taken. Kaiser talks about the royal emblems that were taken when the King's Palace was when the King's Palace was plundered by the colonialists. And so since that time, because the stool, the drum, are the royal emblems that are used for coronation. And so because these items were removed, no king could be coronated.
In Uganda.
So no stool, yes, in Uganda. So no stool, no king. No drum, no king. And so it denies that community that their king, their governance structure, their leader. And so when you talk about the capacity, in terms of bringing back the items, these things already were somewhere, they were being used for a purpose. And so in their return, we're looking at how will this be handled when they're brought back? The whole question that Jerry talked about, the decolonized museum space, what will that look like? Is it a structure? Is it an attitude? Is it a mentality, a perspective to life? Is it an ideology as opposed to a structure that we are talking about? What are the legal frameworks that we have? Like I said, what recourse do we have? What have we signed against in terms of international conventions, in terms of bringing these things back? And so the issue of capacity addresses a broad range of things, as opposed to do we have a well-aired, well-lit room. And we speak of voicing because we say everybody needs to be put on that table for this discussion on restitution. To define what that restitution is, to define what that list is of the things that we want brought back, and so on and so forth. I could go on, but I will stop there. Thank you.